There is a light bulb in a fire station in Livermore, California that has been burning since 1901. It has been running continuously for over 120 years, with only a handful of brief interruptions. It has its own webcam. The Guinness Book of World Records has certified it. Ripley's Believe It or Not has featured it. The bulb itself was manufactured in the late 1890s by a small company in Ohio called Shelby Electric. They used a hand-blown glass envelope and a carbon filament made by a process that was never fully documented and has been reportedly lost. It was designed to last, and so far it outlasted every human being that was alive when it was first lit. This leads us to a question. If a light bulb made in the 1890s is still burning today, why does the one you bought last year last only 8 months? The answer to that question involves a secret cartel, a Swiss testing laboratory, and a European-based subsidiary of a U.S. corporate giant that resulted in a deal a federal judge ruled violated U.S. law. But that's only half the story, since the light bulb you most likely have right now was changed in ways that go beyond just lifespan. Now, this might sound crazy, but the light bulbs being sold today have the ability to listen to your most intimate conversations. And that part of the story involves a federal law that was never quite a ban, wireless routers, and a decision made in Washington in the late 2000s that most Americans still don't know happened. This is the story of your light bulb, what it used to be and what replaced it, and what the thing hanging in your ceiling is actually capable of doing to you right now, and how it could do those things without anyone ever touching it, without anyone ever entering your home, and without you ever even knowing it happened. A brief history of the light bulb. To understand what happened to the light bulb, you have to understand what it actually was before anyone decided to change it in ways beyond simply providing light. The story begins in 1802 with a British chemist named Humphrey Davy. Davy connected 2 carbon rods to a powerful battery and discovered that if you ran enough current through them, the air between the tips would ignite into a sustained arc of brilliant white light. It was the first practical demonstration that electricity could produce light. The arc lamp that resulted from the discovery was bright enough to illuminate streets and large public spaces, but it was far too intense and far too dangerous for use inside a home. For the next 70 years, inventors across Europe and America tried to solve the problem of scale. They worked to create a smaller and more controllable form of electric light that could live inside a room without burning the house down. The core challenge was the filament. You needed a material that could be heated to the point of incandescence. Incandescence was the point at which something glowed without burning up or melting. Dozens of materials were tested with countless patents being filed by inventors of all kinds. Thomas Edison filed his first patent for an electric lamp in 1878. By October of 1879, his team had produced a bulb with a carbonized cotton thread filament that burned for 14.5 hours. That was enough to prove the concept. They kept working and testing one type of material after another. In a way, Edison and his team used a simple method of simply iterating with different substances until they found one that worked. And they finally found it in the form of bamboo. They found that a carbonized bamboo filament extended the life of a light bulb to over 1,200 hours. Edison's company began selling these new light bulbs commercially in 1880. But Edison did not stop at just the light bulb. He built the whole system around it, which involved the generators, the distribution wiring, the meters, and the sockets. In 1882, he opened the Pearl Street Station in Lower Manhattan. This was the first commercial electrical power plant in the United States. Within a few months, it was serving several hundred customers. And within a year, it was powering over 10,000 bulbs. The refinements continued. In 1906, General Electric patented a process for making filaments out of tungsten. Tungsten was a metal with a melting point so high it could be heated to extraordinarily high temperatures without destroying itself. By 1910, tungsten filament had become the standard. By 1913, engineers discovered that filling the bulb with an inert gas rather than maintaining a vacuum allowed the filament to burn hotter and brighter without evaporating as quickly. The double-coiled filament followed in the 1930s. With that, the basic design of the incandescent bulb was essentially complete. The cartel that controlled light. By the early 1920s, the light bulb was very good at its job. Engineers had spent 40 years making light bulbs last longer. By 1924, a standard household bulb was lasting between 2,000 and 2,500 hours. Some experimental designs were demonstrating lifespans far beyond that. The technology was maturing, and the product was becoming more reliable. But 1924 would be the last year of progress for the light bulb. The lifespan would decrease after that, and this decrease wasn't an accident. In late December 1924, representatives of the world's major light bulb manufacturers gathered in Geneva, Switzerland. The companies included nearly all the big names at the time, such as Osram of Germany, Philips of the Netherlands, Associated Electrical Industries of Britain, and overseas subsidiaries of General Electric. Together, they formed a cartel, incorporated under Swiss law, and gave it a name, Phoebus, the name referencing the Greek god of light. One of the results of this cartel was reducing the lifespan of a standard household light bulb to 1,000 hours. This would naturally lead to more sales of light bulbs, because consumers would have to replace their bulbs more often. Every factory bound by the cartel agreement was required to submit samples to a central testing laboratory in Switzerland. If a factory's bulb lasted longer than 1,000 hours on average, the factory was fined. If they lasted shorter, it was also fined, since shorter-lived bulbs would attract attention. The target was 1,000 hours. In 1927, Tokyo Electric, which was one of the cartel's members, noted in an internal memo that after shortening the lives of its bulbs, their sales jumped fivefold. The Phoebus cartel was eventually found in U.S. federal court to have violated the Sherman Antitrust Act. The cartel formally dissolved in 1939 when the outbreak of World War II made coordination among members from the warring nations impossible. But the standard it established didn't dissolve with it. The 1,000-hour bulb had become the standard. Even after the war and the antitrust rulings, the industry kept making bulbs that lasted only 1,000 hours. And that average of lifespan is still pretty much the norm today. The Centennial bulb in Livermore that has been burning since 1901, it was made at a time when the engineering goal was to make bulbs last as long as possible. What came after it is what a light bulb looks like when the people making it are trying to make it fail for their own financial gain. So I want to take a pause for a minute and ask you, if you are interested, to send me an email at jeremy@plainmeaning.com, because basically what I'm doing beyond these videos is I'm going to provide updates every week to provide an email to follow up on the issues that I've covered in these videos. Whether it is this one regarding, potential bulb spying on us, or some of the other videos, such as about what was going on with the Postal Service, or what's going on with the end of the landlines, or at least the attempt to end the landlines. The law that wasn't quite a ban. By the early 21st century, the incandescent light bulb had been around for over 100 years. It lit the Oval Office while Franklin Roosevelt worked through the strategy to win a world war. It lit Ed Sullivan's stage, where Elvis Presley moved from a radio star into a global cultural phenomenon. It lit the inside of the lunar module as the astronauts inside it calculated landing coordinates for the moment humanity first stepped foot on a surface beyond Earth. It was cheap to make, universally compatible, and understood by every person on the planet. And in December 2007, Congress passed a law that basically ended it. The law was titled the Energy Independence and Security Act. It was nearly 2,000 pages of fuel economy standards, biofuel development, and dozens of other provisions. And buried within it was a section on light bulbs. That light bulb section ostensibly simply set a new performance standard. It was described as stronger benchmarks to ensure you had more efficient light bulbs. But in reality, it changed the measurement of how we measure our lights. And this change of standards was something that traditional light bulb just couldn't meet. Instead of watts, the law pointed to something called lumens as the new benchmark. The law was signed by President George W. Bush and passed with bipartisan support. But probably the biggest supporters were the companies that dominated the light bulb market. It was a calculated defensive maneuver to protect their market dominance. By 2007, the traditional incandescent light bulb had become a commodity product. Because the patents on tungsten filaments had expired decades prior, cheap generic imports were flooding the market. The major manufacturers realized that as long as the old 100-watt standard existed, they were stuck in a race to the bottom against low-cost competitors they could no longer outcompete. The new law pivoted the entire American infrastructure toward high-tech compact fluorescents, CFLs, and LEDs. These were technologies where they held patents. This shift transformed the light bulb from a simple 10-cent piece of glass that anyone could make into a complex electronic device that required proprietary phosphors and licensed semiconductors. In essence, these companies supported a legal barrier to entry that forced every American to trade a public domain technology for one that the big players owned, controlled, and could price at a premium. The factories go dark. When the Energy Independence and Security Act passed in December of 2007, General Electric did not wait to see how the politics played out. Within months of the bill signing, the company announced it would be closing a number of its light bulb manufacturing facilities in the United States. The economics of making light bulbs that met the new efficiency requirements, which now were compact fluorescents and eventually LEDs, were cheaper to produce overseas. The closure that drew the most attention was a plant in Winchester, Virginia. It was one of the last major facilities in the country making ordinary incandescent light bulbs. The workers of that plant had been making bulbs for decades, at wages that reached $30 an hour. Pretty good jobs. When the plant closed in 2010, those jobs didn't move somewhere else in America. They just vanished. The legislation had been sold in part on the promise that moving toward energy-efficient lighting would create American manufacturing jobs. Politicians said the next generation of bulbs would be made in America by American workers. But what actually happened was the opposite. Those jobs were taken out of places with names like Winchester and went to others with names like Guangdong Province. The closures continued through the following years. Sylvania, Philips, and the other major brands followed the same trajectory. One by one, the facilities that had been producing American light bulbs for generations were being shuttered. In 2016, the last incandescent light bulb manufacturing plant in the United States closed. It was the Sylvania facility in Wellsboro, Pennsylvania. And then came the final chapter of the Sylvania story. Osram Sylvania's General Lighting Division was spun off into a separate entity called Ledvance. In 2016, it was announced that Ledvance had been purchased by a Chinese consortium for $400 million. The brand name remained. The American manufacturing was gone. And sadly, that's not an isolated incident. More and more often, when you go to the store and you find a brand name you remember and that you're familiar with, when you pick that product up, that name has stayed the same. But the people behind it and the country that they're in, well, that's changed. And you probably don't even know. General Electric's lighting division followed a similar path. GE Lighting was sold to Savant Systems in 2020. The actual manufacturing of GE-branded bulbs, that takes place overwhelmingly in China. In 2019, China accounted for approximately 80% of global LED lamp exports. The question of who benefited from the 2007 law isn't complicated, and its impact on American manufacturing is easily charted with a graph showing a line that only goes down. The green promise that isn't. The case for replacing the incandescent light bulb rested on a simple argument. The incandescent was wasteful. It converted roughly 90% of the electricity it consumed into heat rather than light. LED bulbs used 75% less energy for the same light output and lasted 25 times longer. But the reality, after years of data following the transition, shows something a little bit more complicated. The environmental cost was just transferred to a different type of harm. And the promise of longer-lasting bulbs, well, that didn't quite happen either. Researchers at the University of California, Irvine, and UC Davis published a study in the journal Environmental Science and Technology in 2011. They tested LED bulbs and found that they contained lead, arsenic, and more than a dozen other potentially hazardous substances. Low-intensity red LEDs contain up to 8 times the amount of lead allowed under California's hazardous waste regulations. The researchers noted that the bulbs had not been properly tested for environmental health impacts before being marketed as a preferred alternative to incandescents. But the toxicity of the finished product is only part of the story. The more significant environmental question is what goes into making these bulbs in the first place. LED chips require rare earth elements. The phosphor powder used in LED chips contains, and forgive my pronunciation, yttrium, europium, cerium, lanthanum, terbium, and other elements from the rare earth group. These elements are what produce the specific wavelengths of light that make an LED bulb look like white light rather than a blue glare. Without them, the bulb doesn't work. And getting them out of the ground is one of the most environmentally destructive industrial processes on the planet. China controls approximately 60% of global rare earth mining and 85 to 90% of global rare earth processing. That dominance was achieved through decades of state investment, subsidized production, cheap labor, and, most critically, a deliberate tolerance for environmental destruction that other countries were just not willing to accept. The extraction process involves pumping chemicals into hillsides to flush rare earth elements out of clay deposits. The chemicals leach into groundwater and contaminate rivers. They acidify soil. Agricultural land that supported farming communities for generations became incapable of growing crops. Downstream cities with populations in the millions find their water supplies compromised. A researcher studying the health effects of rare earth mining in these regions described the outcomes plainly. The end impact, he said, could include cancers, bone cancer, skin cancer, as well as cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. High rates of these conditions have been documented in communities near mining sites for years. Now set aside the mining and return to the finished product, because there's one more part of the environmental argument that the official story leaves out. It concerns what happens at the end of the bulb's life. When an LED bulb burns out, what remains is often a residue of arsenic, lead, and other heavy metals, in concentrations that exceed federal hazardous waste thresholds. In Europe, LED recycling is legally required. In the United States, in most places, it's not. The vast majority of LED bulbs sold in America end up in landfills. That's where their components leach into groundwater. The incandescent was inefficient in one specific way. The LED trades that inefficiency for a set of costs that are larger and more hidden in many other ways. Threat Level 1. When the incandescent phase-out began in 2012, the bulb that was actually being pushed as a replacement was not an LED. It was the compact fluorescent lamp, the CFL, the spiral-shaped bulb that became ubiquitous in American homes and offices through the early part of the decade often took 30 seconds to reach full brightness and cast a light that many people found cold and unflattering. It also contained a small amount of mercury that meant you technically had a hazardous material incident if you ever broke one on your floor. A compact fluorescent lamp works by running an electrical current through a tube containing argon gas and a small amount of mercury vapor. The reaction produces ultraviolet light and excites a phosphor coating on the inside of the tube, which produces visible light. The electronics required to manage this process, which is called the ballast, are contained in the base of the bulb. Those electronics generate electromagnetic interference. They emit radio frequency noise, and they are loud enough in the electromagnetic spectrum that fluorescent lighting is specifically excluded from use in MRI suites and other environments sensitive to electromagnetic noise. On the surface, the CFL seems technologically harmless, but that's an illusion. While the CFL lacks a digital brain, the high-frequency switching ballast created a vulnerability that didn't exist with the incandescent. According to research from the University of Washington's UbiComp lab, the ballast turns the entire bulb into a giant sensor. When you move through a room, your body changes the electrical makeup of the air around the bulb. Because the CFL is an active oscillator, it reacts to your presence with the changes injecting a unique noise signature directly into your home's copper wiring. An intruder doesn't need to hack your Wi-Fi or install a camera. They only need to monitor the electrical noise at a single wall outlet or at a smart meter outside to listen to the house. By analyzing EMI fluctuations, they can track your movement from room to room, detect your gestures, and map your daily routine. The incandescent was a simple resistor, but the CFL can basically be a broadcaster. So I want to take a pause right here. First off, if you are enjoying this video and you think this provides any type of value at all whatsoever, I put a lot into this. And regardless if anybody watches it, I learned a lot by making it. And so I've already created value for myself. But obviously my aim is to produce value for other people too, and to try to create a community. So if you found any value with this, I want to go ahead and ask you now to please subscribe if you haven't already, and please like if you haven't already this video, because that helps get this message across farther. Because if you liked it and I like it, then I think both of us would like to see other people see it so that they could like it too. Threat Level 2. Then came the LED, the light emitting diode. An LED is a semiconductor. It produces light when electrical current passes through it, and electrons recombine across a junction in the semiconductor material. And here is one of the most consequential differences. An LED can not only emit light, it can detect it too. The same junction that produces light when current flows through it can generate current when light falls on it. This is exactly how a solar cell works. Under certain conditions, an LED can function as a light receiver. That capability exists in every LED bulb, regardless of whether anyone has chosen to exploit it. LEDs have something called a driver circuitry. This is a system of electronics that convert household AC current to the DC current the LED needs. It also generates electromagnetic interference that propagates through your home's electrical wiring, and that wiring can become a communication channel. Researchers have demonstrated that the devices connected to the same electrical circuit can exchange data through the power line itself by modulating power consumption in detectable patterns. Your LED bulb is connected to that channel whether you want it to be or not. The silent listener. While an LED doesn't have a microphone, it has a semiconductor junction that is hypersensitive to its environment. Sound is just a vibration, and in a room, those vibrations hit the glass and the internal components of the bulb. Researchers at various universities demonstrated a way to actually record sounds through the vibrations made around LEDs in a house. They proved that by using a remote electro-optical sensor, basically a high-end telescope pointed at a bulb, they could recover high-fidelity audio from a room by simply measuring the minute, microscopic fluctuations in the light's intensity caused by sound waves hitting the bulbs. The watcher? If you think a listening bulb is bad, you won't like what I'm about to tell you. An LED is not just a light, it's a semiconductor device that can respond to light as well as produce it. Because the junction inside an LED is bidirectional, it can behave like a photodiode under the right conditions. That means it doesn't just emit light, it can react to it. The same structure that generates photons when currents flow through it can generate current when photons hit it. That's not theoretical. It's a property of how the device was built. In 2024, researchers at Massachusetts Institute of Technology demonstrated what that means in practice. Using nothing but a device's ambient light sensor, which is a single light-sensitive semiconductor, and the light reflecting around the room, they reconstructed a coarse image of hand gestures and tracked human movement without a camera. That experiment did not use a ceiling light bulb, but it proved something more important. Once a device contains light-sensitive semiconductor components, it can begin extracting information from the environment around it. The light bulb isn't just a piece of glass and a filament anymore. It's a semiconductor device connected to a circuit. It sits in the same environment, it is exposed to the same light, and it is built on the same physics. The line between illumination and sensing is thinner than most people think, and the bulb in your ceiling is no longer as passive as you think it is. Too smart for your own good. So what we covered were the earlier new bulbs. We need to look into what is actually inside the newest bulbs being sold today. These are the latest versions of smart bulbs. The Wi-Fi capable microcontroller that powers a smart bulb costs less than $1 in volume production. Budget manufacturers frequently use the same chipsets across their entire product line, with wireless functionality enabled in some products and disabled in others at the firmware level. But even if it ships in a disabled form, it can be simply enabled later. This means that the capability to make a bulb smart is present whether the box says it's smart or not. A security researcher presenting at a conference in 2025 demonstrated this live. He took a smart bulb widely available on Amazon and reprogrammed it using freely available open source tools. The result was a device capable of capturing Wi-Fi handshakes for password cracking, launching attacks that knocked devices off a network, creating fake Wi-Fi networks designed to steal login credentials, while doing all this with basically what looked like an ordinary light bulb that was turned off. The consumer standing in the lighting aisle today can't often tell whether the bulb they are buying contains this wireless capability. But what about the real smart bulbs? The ones with the app and can integrate with your home automation system. That bulb is really a computer. It has a processor and a memory, and it runs firmware. It also maintains a persistent connection to a network. It stores your Wi-Fi credentials in a flash memory and communicates with servers operated by its manufacturers. It is awake and listening to network traffic even when the light is off. The smart element of the bulb does not power down when you hit the switch. It stays on, connected, and waiting for the next command. The light bulb as a weapon. There is one more attack threat using smart bulbs worth mentioning, and in this case I mean an actual attack against one's safety and not just to one's privacy. Researchers have demonstrated that compromised smart bulbs could be used to generate strobe effects at frequencies specifically calibrated to trigger photosensitive seizures in people with certain forms of epilepsy. There are no known incidents of this actually occurring, however, but it definitely gives you something to think about. The bulb never forgets. Everything we've discussed so far involves an attack on a bulb that is installed in a socket. Someone exploits a protocol vulnerability or recruits the device into a botnet and gets it to do things and report back information. That is an active threat. This section is about what happens after the bulb dies. When a smart bulb stops working, Most people do the same thing they've always done with a dead light bulb. They unscrew it and throw it away in the trash. But unlike an incandescent bulb, which contains nothing that persists beyond its function as a light source, a smart bulb contains flash memory. And flash memory is non-volatile. It retains its contents when power is removed. That information remains there and fully capable of being read by anyone with the right equipment. What is stored in that memory? Researchers who examined the flash memory of discarded smart bulbs found that the memory retained Wi-Fi network credentials, the name of the network the bulb had connected to, and the password needed to connect to it. And the most troubling thing of all was it was stored in a recoverable form. There was no encryption. The problem is compounded by the complete absence of any infrastructure or legal requirement for addressing it. In the United States, there is no federal mandate requiring smart bulb recycling. There is no standard for credential wiping before disposal. The factory reset process for most smart bulbs, which is the process that is supposed to return the device to its original state, does not reliably overwrite the credential storage in flash memory. Throwing your smart bulb away is not the same as throwing an incandescent light bulb away. That is a storage device that has been treated as trash. It contains information about your network that was never intended to leave your home. Not every threat requires a sophisticated attacker. Some of them just require a dumpster and the knowledge that what you are looking for is in there. I want to end where we began, which is Livermore, California, in the Centennial bulb. The one burning since 1901. The one made before the cartel, before the mandate, before any of this. The firefighters who work at that station have been giving tours of it for decades. They answer questions about it. They escort visitors in to look at it. They have even thrown parties for it. They escorted it to its current home in a specially designed box with a full fire truck escort, an electrician standing by to reinstall it the moment it arrived because the 22 minutes it was without power during that move was considered significant enough to document. They take care of it because it's theirs, because it has been there longer than any of them have been alive, because it is a piece of that place and of the time before things became what they have become now. It does not have a network connection or a flash memory chip, or a switching power supply or a microcontroller manufactured in Shanghai. It definitely doesn't know your Wi-Fi password. It can't be recruited into a botnet or used to infiltrate your network or listen to your most sensitive conversations. It just gives light. And it has been doing that without interruption for 124 years. So think about that the next time you screw in a light bulb. Because chances are that bulb you're screwing in is more than just a light.